This is the hour, the Steven Hour, and yes, we are back with another 007 movie review, and today I'll be finally reviewing the long-awaited and long-anticipated Bond film, No Time to Die, released in 2021. Now, before we get further into the review, before I get into the cast, the plot, my own personal thoughts, let's get into a bit of background about this film, and trust me, there's a lot to go through with this particular film installment. I don't really know where to begin with the background for this film, but I'll try my best. In 2015, of course, the film Spectre was released, and little did we know when that film was released, who knew we had to wait for at least 6 more years until the next film, as the production for this one is complicated, with directors coming and going, the script not being. I can vividly remember, about the hype for the next Bond film, with even rumoured for possible titles. I remember Shatterhand was actually a possible title that was heavily hinted as the next one. Eventually, however, the title was released, No Time to Die. And the film was scheduled to be released in April 2020, as you can see on the photo for the poster. The trailer, when this hit, I think it broke the internet a bit. It was just, like big. And when you saw the trailer, you knew this is not going to be your average Bond film. You were really in for something different. But, as we know, COVID happened. The pandemic, in lockdown, and as a result, the release date for this and many films were halted. And this film was constantly postponed until it was finally released. So as far as I know, the film has did pretty well at the box office. It definitely did well with streaming services. And this film should be noted as Daniel Craig's final outing. Again, after Spectre, it was hinted he wouldn't come back, though he did agree to come back for this film, with this to be, Craig's final installment. And I guess what he and many people behind the scenes wanted was to give a very much a fitting and proper final goodbye to this 007. And it was really felt, when I watched this, did really feel like it was the end of an era. With Bond, finally, this incarnation ending, I just really knew that this was definitely going to be a different film overall, especially with the Craig films just being resoundingly different. The director for this was Kerry Kuji Funkanaga. I'm probably butchering that name badly. It's not even funny. But honestly, he was brought on, and really, in my opinion, he really did something different with this film. So the question remains, how is No Time to Die? Is it a good film? Is it an average? Is it bad? Is it the first film to finally, what I like to call the final film curse? Is it for once a good final Bond film for an actor? Well, before we get into the plot and my thoughts, let's hop straight into the cast. The cast for this film is, of course, Daniel Craig back as Bond for the final time. And I think Daniel Craig is probably one of the only Bond actors in history to be consistently good throughout all his films. Usually by the time of Bond's on their final film, there's something really off with their performance or even physique. But honestly, Craig, he still looks the part despite being in his early 50s, and he still acts really well, but he's still given new material to do, and I like that about his Bond. It feels fresh. Also, for the first time ever, a Bond girl from a previous film returns in a film. Now, technically, you could say Sylvia Trench from the first 2 ever Bond films is technically, but if you really think about it, the first ever main Bond girl to come back in the next film and still be the main Bond girl is absolutely great. And I think this time around, the character of Madeleine Swann, sorry, I'm partly a little bit sick today. Madeleine Swann, still portrayed by Lee Sendux, probably butchering that name again, really sorry. Honestly, gives more time to really grow and develop her character. I think she did more than the previous film, and honestly makes her character really that more interesting. And the villain for this film is Staffen, portrayed by Rami Malek, who of course was best remembered for, I think it was either his Oscar-nominated or Oscar-winning performance in Bohemian Rhapsody as Freddie Mercury, you know, the Queen biopic. So because of that hype, I guess it made natural sense for him. How do I feel about Stafford? I think out of all the Craig Bond villains, he's the creepiest and the most unsettling. And honestly, definitely different. He's different. And I think when ranking all the Craig Bond villains, he's in top 3 for me. There's Raoul Silver 1, Le Chiffre 2, Stafford 3, Blofeld 4, and Green last. And honestly, he definitely makes this character different. However, whether I like him in top 10, well, that's a different question we'll answer later in the video. Speaking of Blofeld, which I mentioned before, Christoph Waltz is back, reprising the role of Blofeld. The first time ever, Blofeld is back, reprised by the same actor. Or maybe you could say that technically with From Russia with Love and Thunderball, as that was technically done, and I guess that is true, but really, think about it, he's back. It's kind of back for an Easter egg, but it's also like how the characters develop with being more insane and deranged, and still keeping the, you know, hatred and rivalry with Bond. Again, my thoughts are with the whole brother-sibling thing. I'm still not really keen on that, but I still like the characterization. And of course, we have a lot of the MI6 regulars back for this film installment. We have M, still portrayed by Ralph Fiennes, and definitely the most complex and compelling, with furthering develop, and honestly, you know, just doing something different with the character. Whether it's a hit or miss is up to you, but I personally felt it's different. Well, I like it. Again, I will explain later in the film. Miss Moneypenny, still portrayed by Nomia Harris, still great as ever. We have Bill Tanner back, still played by Rory Kinnear, probably the most consistent actor with Bill Tanner, and I'm really great that, you know, that he could still bring the play the character back. Speaking of characters being brought back, Felix Slider is back for the 3rd time, still portrayed by Jeffrey Wright. Out of everyone to play Felix Slider, he's probably the most remembered actor to play the role. And honestly, I like for Craig's final outing, they bring him back, and well, him and Leiter have the sort of best friend buddy thing, which I really like. Q is back here, still portrayed by Ben Whishaw, still great as ever, and I'd like to add a detail that made it that he's actually gay, but it's not shoved in your face. It feels natural and organic, and honestly just really fits this interpretation really well. Interesting characters we got introduced, or new, with some of the old favorites. Let's introduce some new characters that were brought into this film. New characters we got are Paloma. Yeah, it's a show. Paloma here, portrayed by Ana de Armas. She's a CIA agent, essentially a rookie on a first field assignment, and she is just colourful. She's not a bimbo like you would expect normally with characters like that in a Bond film when they're presented as a rookie agent. She's fun, confident, well, nervous, of course, being a first field assignment. And I like the fact that she was just thrown in at just last minute. And honestly, the relationship she has with Bond is more of a brother-sibling thing, but not rivalry, but more like the little sister that a big brother, protective brother likes to, you know, protect. And they have this really nice fun banter. And despite she has a very brief scene moment in the film, she's arguably my second favorite, you know. She's just one of my favorite aspects of the film, and I really wish this character can be brought back. And she's more liked than the new female character that was introduced for this film, Nomi, portrayed by Lashana Lynch, aka 007. In this film, she takes on the new name 007 title, and people are mixed with it. I, again, have no problems with 007 being, you know, the number being given to a new agent. I'm fine with that. And people are mixed because they want to be more hip, current, and political agenda thing. Now, I'm divided on that. I don't necessarily hate this character, but I do think, honestly, it was trying to push that political agenda, and honestly, just didn't work for me. And I felt it was just something was not clicking or coming together with this character. Whether it's the writing or the performance, I don't know. Don't get me wrong, she's even though I can't find it hard to really like her in the beginning of the film, when it comes to the end, I really see the character come more into her own. And I feel she does really well to an extent. She's portrayed really as Bond's kind of rival. She's, kind of feels threatened with Bond kind of being back, as she's like, I guess I could say, like, this is the person that had the number before. And I guess she eventually has to mellow out and realize this is, that, there's a reason he had this number before and why it's so, like, big with the other agents. And I like how she eventually mellows it out. But again, 50-50 on the character, if I could be blunt. Other characters included in the film are Logan Ash, who is essentially a CIA agent portrayed by Billy Magnuson, probably not pronouncing that name right, and it's essentially, Leiter's kind of partner in the film. We have other characters here include Dr. Voldo Orbchev, portrayed by David Denkik, probably butchering that name, and he's basically a rogue scientist, a bit comic relief, but also a character that's also serves as a plot, as a a sort of plot, character that, like kind of plot device. That's the word a plot device. Other characters include the henchmen of the film. Actually, let's go back to this character first. Character of Mathlid, portrayed by Lisa Dawsonett, and essentially it's this 5-year-old child, and it has a very interesting revelation in the film that I just can't spoil just yet, but we'll get to it. Really, the last, I guess, bit in the plot synopsis is the villain, henchman Primo, and is essentially like the henchman of him. He has this cyber robotic eye, and is essentially was first presented a member of working with one villain before eventually throwing himself working for the other villain of the film, and he is portrayed by Dali Bansella. And I get this kind of feeling he's like this, like an Italian version of Dario, from License to Kill. I kind of get the same vibe, but the cyber eye is cool. He's really, I admit, he's a fun henchman. I kind of find it the same as Hicks. Modern updates of classic henchmen, but also have their own characteristics and being unique. I really like him. He's cool. He's cool. Anyway, with the cast out of the way, let's hop straight into the review, shall we? We begin this movie with yet another traditional gun barrel. Now, it should be noted, due to, I don't know what reason, there are two versions of the gun barrel, but they essentially end the same way. Now, what's interesting about the gun barrel is it's almost white and almost a silver type. It's a very different looking gun barrel to than what we're used to seeing. I think it is perhaps one of the best uses of the classic gun barrel, and it's definitely, I think, up there with the Casino Royale presentation of the gun barrel. After that, instead of the traditional white, it goes to almost a whitish black, and then we zoom into almost this snow forest, where we see a man, almost like a masked man, walking through the snow leading up to a house. Here in the house is a young Madeleine Swann, essentially as a child with her mother. This is the origin that we were alluded to in Spectre, and here we get to see it. Her mother is essentially almost a drunk, no disregard, well, not a bad mother, but I would say a bit of a neglectful one. Eventually, the man makes his way into the house and, scares Madeleine and ends up shooting Madeleine's mum. It is a cold, I would say cold kill, and that's quite an and that is very one hell of a way to start the film off. The masked man eventually goes after Madeleine, but she thinks she's taken him down, she ends up scared and ends up running out of the house onto the ice, and she falls into the ice. And the masked man, now I just love how the guy looks with that cracked mask open. You could see like his skin, it's not burnt, but you can clearly tell there's just something wrong. And of course he's just firing the machine gun through the ice trying to hit her. This is almost like a home invasion film, which I never thought they'd do that in a Bond film. We then cut from that, which again, this opening was a flashback to where Madeleine is now. I like how the transition was seamlessly from the flashback to the present time, where we see her and Bond essentially living a peaceful life. And one thing I absolutely love about Daniel Craig is that throughout all his 5 installments, despite the fact he got older, he still looked very fit and in great physical condition to play this role. And he still has it, especially at the age of 50. They end up driving away with saying how, the Bond says this line as they drive away. It's nice, and it got me excited because he says, "We have all the time in the world." Not only did my mouth drop when I saw that in the theater, but I got a goosebump when I was hearing, that little theme song of On Her Majesty's "We Have All the Time in the World," the instrumental version. I'm just like, wow. For those who don't know the significance of that, you have to be a really hardcore Bond fan to know that. And with me being On Her Majesty's my favorite Bond film of all time, that just makes me giddy even more than ever. And it's just beautiful little reference. They end up somewhere in Italy where this is kind of like event thing going on in this, and then in this posh hotel. And the event is a sort of like burning away your passing. You would write it down on a piece of paper, light it on fire, and just throw it. And the two are here to essentially like fully leave their past behind. And Bond goes through with it as Madeleine is going to be opening a bit more about her past. So Bond's willing to go through with it. Now, on something I just want to halt before we go further. What I love about this film is, again, Madeleine is back. And this is a chance to really explore her character more. Something, again, I have a feeling that not most fans were happy with her in the first film. They were probably mixed. Some people may have liked her, some wouldn't. She would have been a mix, but still very positively amongst viewers. I love that they're bringing her back to really further explore her. Speaking of exploring, we're exploring a bit of Bond's past here, as Bond is coming to terms with Vesperlin. Yes, in Italy, we go to the final resting place of Vesperlin, all the way back from Casino Royale. Again, hardcore Bond fans and those who've seen all the Craig films would know and love this reference. Bond says even after all this time, he still loved her. Still loves her. And, it essentially is letting go of his past, which is honestly a nice little wrap-up. As again, this is Craig's final film, and when I saw this, I knew, okay, this is not going to be your average final Bond film installment for an actor. They are really giving this Bond almost a victory lap. And just when we get this nice somber moment, out of nowhere, an explosion comes, and I was shocked. Bond ends up interrogating one of the men at the place where it was happening, and it's revealed that it was done by Spectre. I also love, just before the explosion happened, Bond saw like a piece of paper that had the Spectre logo. Honestly, I was not expecting Spectre to come back for this installment. I thought it was just Blofeld, and that's it, through the trailers. I never thought they would bring Blofeld, the Spectre organization back, but it also makes sense that they would. No, with such a large criminal organization that Blofeld would have created, no way, the organization would have completely fell apart with Blofeld, left, locked up, or it's large enough to go further underground, and he could essentially run it from almost prison, which honestly almost kind of get Spectre more of a crime family vibe, and it's ironically in Italy, so you get a bit of that reference. With that, Bond quickly tries to make his way back to Madeleine's hotel room, as one of the thugs interrogating essentially implies that Madeleine had set him up. and he does not know how to process this. Daniel Craig gave the best facial expression because he doesn't know how to process this, but he ends up trying to get back. He also gets into a fight with the henchman of the film, Primo, and his gimmick is he has this kind of cybernetic eye. I will admit, in the theater, it did put me out a bit because I thought that was a bit too futuristic for a Bond film, but I got over it as I realized, you know what, we've had metal teeth, we've had a guy with a top hat that throws it, a wristwatch that happens to have this wire to strangle people. I realize it's all silly, but a cybernetic eye, you know what, I can buy it. Eventually, Bond makes his way back to the hotel room, and the chase back there, it is so great. Even though I saw the chase kind of happen in the trailer, it was still just fantastic. To still see it and how they pulled the stunt off. It looked so practical. The bike jump is, for me, one of my favorite scenes of the film. As Bond makes his way back, he ends up getting Madeleine, and you can definitely tell that he just doesn't know what to believe. Madeleine is clearly trying to tell him something, and he ends up taking her into the Aston Martin. The classic Aston Martin DB5. They got in it, and they ended up driving away, but still being chased by Spectre henchmen. Eventually, I'm guessing some kind of Times Square, they end up essentially cornered, with the machine gun blasting the windshield, and you almost see that Bond is just given up and is about to accept defeat, accept death, which is very, honestly brutal, and Madeleine just, cowering, for Bond to get out. And I also like throughout the chase, she is trying to tell him something, and this will become a huge plot point later in the film. But eventually, Bond does snap out of it. He uses some gadgets from the Aston Martin, the classic, smoke screen, the machine guns, and ends up quickly, getting out of the situation. He then takes Madeleine onto the train and tells her to get on. And the train's about to leave. He says, "Aren't you coming with?" No. Bond is not. He's leaving her, and, and it's heartbreaking for this scene to start the film. Bond is hurt, clearly, and it's sad. Just when you thought at the end of Spectre was finally going to get a happy ending, he's hurt. Emotionally, doesn't know who to trust, and he lets Madeleine on the train, leaves her, and he becomes cold, disheveled. It is a very unique way to open the film. This is also the longest opening to a Bond film, beating The Well Was Not Enough, which had the longest opening before we get to the title sequence. This beats that, and it starts the film off really in a very unique way, knowing that we are excited for something. I think it's probably the best pre-title sequence of the series, one of the best ever. Is it my personal favorite? Who knows? I'll do a top 10 later, but it's definitely a very unique one, and really starts off the film in its own, in a very, I say, great way. We then get to, of course, the title sequence. The song No Time to Die, sung by, what was it? Let me double check the singer. I believe it's, what was it? Billy, oh jeez, hold on. I need to find her name again. Billie Eilish sings the title song, and I know her for her song Bad Guy, but I was hesitant with her being casted to sing a Bond song, as for me, not all pop stars gel well with doing a Bond song. And how do I honestly feel about this song? Alright, it's not a top 10 for me, but I really like the atmosphere it's going with, and it's accompanying very well with the imagery of the title sequence. A lot of throwbacks to On Her Majesty's, Thunderball, it's almost like the title sequence are a throwback to 60s Bond, which I love. It's a really, overall, it's really different. Whether you like it, it's up to you, but it's different to me, and I don't mind it. It's really fun. We then hop back to London, where there's a sort of where a black ops operation is going on, where men dressed in SWAT suits end up breaking into a scientific facility, where they end up kidnapping a scientist, Voldo Obshiv, butchering that name. And it turns out that this is an MI6 laboratory. They end up killing most of the witnesses and end up kidnapping the scientist. And interesting fact, there's actually a cameo here, or a small part here, by Hugh Dennis, who is a British comedian. I know him from Mock the Week and Not Going Out. If you could just see him, that little, I got a little giggle out of that because I saw him and I knew who he was. And also just how it's done here, this scene, how they essentially are stealing some virus, they end up kidnapping a scientist, but just before the whole thing went down, the scientist in question got a phone call from someone, telling how Spectres are gonna, apprehend him, and how they take him out, not actually kill him, but, like, kidnap him, is, I've never seen Spectre henchmen operate like this proficient, like a Black Ops or a SEALs team. And of course, it's led by Primo. It's definitely interesting, to clearly kickstart like the main villain plot of the film. Just as this happening, M gets a call about the whole thing, and immediately realizes what's going on. He ends up contacting, saying, where's 007? As apparently this was clearly a off the books project that, was clearly meant to be secret. I also like the little Easter eggs that we got in the laboratory with the scientists end up dressing in those suits that were worn in Dr. No with the, like, radiation thing. A nice little throwback to hardcore Bond fans. Now, there's quite a few callbacks to previous Bond adventures, but what I like about it is so seamlessly and not too distracting to the film, not like Die Another Day. It's seamless, it's not too distracting, and they're nice callbacks to hardcore fans. Just as M, gets the, word about the whole thing, he ends up, saying, where's 007? Where we then end up shooting to a different location in Jamaica, which is to an old, retirement villa type place, which is clearly an Easter egg to GoldenEye, not the film, the place that Ian Fleming stayed in, where he wrote the Bond films. A nice little callback, and Bond is pretty much in retirement there. And I love how he's holding like the spear gun, clearly a reference to Thunderball. Again, not too distracting to the film. As he enters the place, he sees a cigar within the within his home, which of course he knows it's not him because he doesn't smoke, but the brand was actually is a reference to what was used in Die Another Day. I love that little reference there. Just as he gets that, he ends up going essentially into the city, well, into the nearby city, where he ends up running in to good old Felix Slider. Yep, he's back for this one, and he's with his new CIA pal. They end up going into a nightclub, which honestly is something I would never associate Bond with. And essentially, Felix Slider and his buddy and the assistant he has, Logan, is trying to ask Bond for help in finding the missing scientist. Bond initially declines and pretty much leaves. He ends up running into a woman who we've seen in brief glimpses of in the nightclub, and she ends up taking, essentially go back, I think it's to his place, and it's revealed that this woman is actually a 007, a 00 agent of the name Naomi, and essentially just telling him to essentially back off, this is her case. Now, I knew instantly through the posters and the promotions, this character was clearly made to be more politically correct, or more current with what is acceptable as a as a agent. Now, I have no problems with that if done right, but honestly, this scene I felt was a little bit awkward. But I did love the fact when they said that her 00 number was 007, Bond's old name. Now, a lot of people will have problems with that because it's so associated with Bond. With me, not so much. I don't really mind that change at all. This is a new that new 007, I don't mind that, because again, that would have been a 00 used by a different agent before Bond came along. And after this encounter, Bond agrees to work with Felix Slider to, you know, help get the scientist back. Clearly, some kind of ego was pulled. Just as that, M is basically asking Q to, you know, go through this missing scientist Gorbachev's hard drive computer for possible more evidence. When he gets a call from Bond about the whole thing, and M's being secretive. This is something I don't like to say out of character, but it's something different with the M character, and I don't really mind it. Now, in the background where M's getting this call from Bond, you can see this car in the background. That was promoted. The Valhalla was promoted to be used in the film, but it kind of never did. It was just used for this scene, and it was nothing more than a background prop. I don't mind that was the real revelation, really, but I'm sure people would have been disappointed, as they would have wanted to have been really used. Anyway, like I said, Bond agrees to help with Felix Leiter, with the case of finding the scientist, and he ends up going to Cuba, where he meets Paloma, who, you know, is a CIA agent working with Felix Slider. It is implied that this is essentially her first field assignment, and honestly, out of the new Bond girls introduced for this film, I absolutely love Paloma, her character so much. I don't get really a sexual tension between her and Bond. I get an almost sibling vibe a little bit. And I love how she was just like, this is her first field assignment. She is new, but also, despite being that, for most people, especially hardcore fans, that might be a recipe for classic, you know, bimbo. But no, she is fully professional. Despite her being first field assignment, you know, I just get a laugh out of this. Bond gets back in his famous tux, and they pretty much go to infiltrate this Spectre meeting, which is essentially Blofeld's party. And I like the little cameos around. You could see, like, previous Spectre agents, you know, from Spectre being here. And it turns out that Blofeld is not here. He is actually he's still locked up, but he's communicating through this eye that is being rigged, you know, to see everything. Just as that's happening, the kidnapped scientist, Gorbachev, ends up doing some kind of computer whiz, and was trying to do it so that his bodyguards aren't seeing him do it. Which essentially will play a huge role in the plot. Just as essentially Bond and her are going around the place, Bond is spotted and is caught dead-handed, and he's about to be infected with this nanotech virus. I can't help but feel, you know, was the nanotech bit changed because of, you know, with the real-life coronavirus, you know, to not have too many parallels? I can't help with that. Anyway, it just says that you think Bond's finally, you know, Bond's almost dead, you know, with this happening. But it turns out the nanobots don't kill him. Instead, they start killing the Spectre agents, you know, around him. Or at least, like, the higher upper agents, not the, you know, not the bodyguards and thugs. Eventually, a shootout occurs with Gorbachev essentially trying to make making a run for it, with Bond and the CIA agent Powell, I'm just going to call Powell, ends up in a shootout with the rest of the agents. Now, even though Bond's holding his own, trying to get to Gorbachev, along with Naomi there, also involved in the shootout, Palermo is essentially showing she could hold her own, and again, she, I feel, is a nice, refreshing Bond girl for this film, and is arguably, I'd say, my favorite Bond girl introduced. Eventually, you know, the shootout ends up with, you know, just as Bond has Gorbachev eventually in the hands of 007, and then it gets back to Bond, where he and Palermo end up escaping in a car that happen to get their hands on, and the car is actually a very clever reference, because it is actually the car used in the first Dr. No. You know, that car Bond was driving in, you know, when he was getting picked up from the airport? That is that. A nice little Easter egg that only really hardcore fans will pick up on. It's not distracting, but it's a nice little continuity for the hardcore fans. Bond ends up making his escape, along with Gorbachev. And this is where Naomi's clearly upset, and Palermo makes her leave here, and even though she was in for a very brief moment, she was still an absolute highlight to the film for me, and I really wish her character could have stayed in more. But of course, it's the writing. Bond then makes his way to Uberchop to essentially this essentially a boat, almost like Black Ops site, where Bond, Felix, and the agent Logan begin to interrogate him, and it's then revealed that Logan is actually a double agent and is in league with the new bad guy of the film, and a shootout and it just used essentially a little bit of a gun battle, which ends up shooting Felix straight in the stomach, straight in the chest. But Logan manages to quickly get off board the boat, onto the plane that Bond arrived in, and takes Uberchov with him. And essentially, the boat begins to sink underground, and shockingly, Felix is killed. First time ever, this character got killed. The closest the character ever got getting killed was probably in License to Kill, when he got his leg chopped off. And I felt it. They actually went this far and killed Felix, of all characters. Again, and, Jeffrey Wright, I think, is the most well-known actor to play this character. I like that they brought him back, and he just went out in an unexpectedly shocking way. And, of course, Bond does manage to get himself out of the boat on a life raft, which was actually, the design of it with the yellow color was clearly a reference to You Only Live Twice at the end of that film, with Bond on that little life raft. And you can see Bond sombering, almost... Anyway, Bond is pretty much mourning the death of Felix, but he ends up finding his way to a cargo boat. As soon as he gets on board, he ends up, cutting to a scene where he ends up, revealing his new car, which is new Aston Martin, which is the same Aston Martin used in The Living Daylights. Yeah, that makes a return. And even though it's brief, again, a nice little cameo Easter egg. And I like how Bond ends up turning up dressed in his like classic tailored suit, like he's back. He clearly tells that he's really gunning for vengeance now. I like the little scene as Bond, ends up back at MI6. The little, like, how he has to sign in. It's like, who you are? Bond. He looks up because he needs the full name, and he goes, James Bond. A nice little fun way of doing the classic line, but doing it in a very different and fun way. Bond ends up running into Naomi again, and now, even though I'm not a huge fan of the character, as I don't hate her, but I felt like, something is not clicking. I like the little ping-pong game they have, we're trying to one-up each other. Eventually, which is honestly a fun way to do with this sort of 00, agent, and I really like it, well, and if you're going to introduce 00 agent, this would be a way I would do it, making like this sort of like rivals, which I'm honestly surprised I haven't done it in the franchise at all until this point. Now, the scene in M's office, we get a few nice jabs, but it's also played a bit differently this time around. Throughout the series, M was always Bond's superior, and could always put him in his place or, have authority. But now Bond's retired, and as soon as Bond finds out that he was doing this underground, essentially off-the-books experiment, and blames him for now this virus that is now in the hands of someone else, he scolds him. And it's an interesting reversal for M, to be, instead of him scolding Bond for quite throughout the series, this is the first time ever he's being scolded. And it feels natural in a way, but you also understand a little bit, especially later in the film, why M would do this kind of project. It's done to save the world, but it's also clearly, you can definitely tell this would only be used in the most extremist of circumstances, and something not to be done lightly. He especially scolds M when he reveals that Felix is dead, and M feels a little bit of guilt, because judging by the dialogue, I think M knew Felix, and even respected him as an agent, a CIA agent. Eventually Bond ends up leaving, and runs into Moneypenny, and then he and Moneypenny end up going to Q's place. Yes, for the first time ever in the series, we're going to Q's place. And that's new, like Q's actual home. It's also revealed here that this Q is gay. gay. And I don't mind it. For a modern age, I don't mind it, but it's not so jarring, it's in your face. And I just love, as soon as he gets in, he's like, Q's first line is, "Oh, you're not dead." And just like, "Oh, I've missed you, Q." I got a huge smirk out of that. And it's just like a nice little gag, almost like old times. Bond then gives Q something clearly he got from the field in some of the previous action scenes, where we get some exposition done, finding out that some of the Spectre agents are dead almost around the world, and clearly it's being masterminded by someone else, trying to take down Spectre. Well, not everyone. There's only one person left still not essentially executed, and that is Spectre's leader, Blofeld, but Blofeld's locked up, and they are hesitant to have Bond go and interrogate him. Because, again, in this continuity, Blofeld is Bond's half-brother. Or step-brother, really. And it's definitely... And I like how, logically, with the events played out in Bond's head, the next logical step is to go to Blofeld. Also, I want to point out, whoever's doing this, he is succeeding in doing one thing that has never been done before in a Bond film, and that is wiping out, essentially, the top echelon leaders in Spectre. Bond could never do that in the original series. Hell, it was barely implied if he really did wipe out Spectre and even Blofeld. So this newcomer is succeeding in doing the one thing that Bond could never do in the original series. Oh, this makes me all the more interested to find out who the main villain is. We also find out that only one person has been granting visiting rights to Blofeld, and that being Madeleine Swann, who is now returned to essentially being a sort of therapist, psychiatrist, and we cut to her going essentially to her office, where she ends up meeting the main villain of the film, Staffen. And the scene with the two in her office is well written, and I think pretty suspenseful, and honestly shows that I would say Staffen is, I'd say, the creepiest of all of the Daniel Craig Bond villains. He's the creepiest. And honestly, just the look of the character just looks like, he not only looks like a villain, but he looks like some guy that's got some very much clearly mental problems. It's also revealed that Staffen, as he hands a box over to Madeleine, and she opens it, it is the mask, the mask the guy was wearing in the very opening of the film, revealing to us that Staffen is the same guy who was wearing that at the opening of the film, which, again, I knew coming into this film, but, if those who weren't, I'm pretty sure that would give them, a bit of a surprise, I guess. Anyway, Staffen then essentially hands Madeleine a sample of this bioweapon to use to essentially kill Blofeld. It's also revealed that really this is a bioweapon. It kills people upon touch, but it also it can be programmed to target very specific persons, and even though she'll have it on her hand, it won't kill her, but it would kill essentially whoever she touches. We then cut to a scene where Bond meets essentially M out in the open, and they have this discussion which I've heard countless times in the Craig films, well, correction, from Skyfall onwards, of the relevancy of espionage and spy work with the world. We don't know who the villains are. It was new in Skyfall because it was being brought up for the first time. But they keep bringing it back, and I don't know. I feel this is the part, I think, of the film where I thought it was unnecessary, that they had to essentially do that with the whole we don't know the villains anymore. We don't know who they are. It's a different world out there. The game is changing. Now, even though I felt that was really unnecessary, my favorite moment by far was when they had the subtle little theme of On Her Majesty's. Not all the time in the world, like the proper On Her Majesty's instrumental theme, very subtly played, and again, that gave me a huge smile on my face. I love how this film had a lot of references to On Her Majesty's, and it just made me smile so much. There's also a sort of transition scene for Bond coming back into, MI6, and the song played in the background to symbolize him coming back into, with the On Her Majesty's government thing. I felt it was done very seamlessly well. I'm not a huge fan of the dialogue, because I felt it was just recycled from previous films, but, you know, let's move on. The scene that follows now is going back to MI6, like M's office, and we get a bit of comedy moment when Q enters M's office, he's Bond, and he's supposed to be surprised that, you know, Bond's back, but M pretty much says, oh, come on, I know you two already met. It's fun little comedy, but it also shows that, you know, M is not a person you could fool easily. I like that little moment. Also, Naomi's in the scene, and she acts a little bit childish a bit, because Bond's reinstated, but he wants to know what's the number. It's childish, but it kind of also fits the character here, because this is her title now, but Bond's back, and the 007 was originally his title, so he's a bit, you know, so she's a bit anxious, you know, to what it was. But it'd be nice if it was just only really done once, but she kind of brings it up at least twice, and I don't know. Again, I don't hate this character. I can enjoy it, but on a few rewatches, not so much. Anyway, with pretty much it's more dialogue that, you know, Spectre's, you know, top agents are being killed, and even a few family members, you know, M assigns Bond to essentially go and interrogate, you know, Blofeld, and Naomi is being tasked to track down Orbashov. We get this bathroom scene where Naomi meets up with Madeleine. And this scene is then eventually followed where Bond is reunited with Madeleine. But Madeleine doesn't touch Bond because by this point she now has the bioweapon on her, and this is like a silent protection move. Bond is, you know, curious about the whole thing. And just as, you know, he leaves with Madeleine, I guess, Naomi goes to Bill Tanner and basically says, does he have this effect with all women? And I do admit, I did get a little chuckle out of that. Here, Blofeld is then brought before them in this almost contraption cell-like. I'm clearly telling that we're trying to get a Silence of the Lamb vibes. And Madeleine is freaking out about seeing Blofeld, and she wants to leave. Bond pretty much, you know, essentially trying to say, you know, what's wrong, calm down. But in the moment, he accidentally gets infected with the virus as she ends up touching him, and she ends up walking away. Just as that happens, Bond ends up in a, you know, a confrontation with Blofeld, still trapped by Christoph Waltz, and it's pretty intense. Blofeld's kind of return in this almost Hannibal Lecter type state. The confrontation for me is, I say, so far, portrayed really well. I also see that this time Blofeld's mental state is rapidly deteriorating. And honestly, I like this version. Like, I think Blofeld is done a bit better here than was in Spectre. I didn't mind him in Spectre. I thought it was done pretty well. But here, I really like it, especially immensely well. I thought it was done pretty good. Eventually, Blofeld reveals, and I kind of knew this coming, he reveals that Madeleine never really set Bond up. He framed her to essentially have Bond, you know, lose any sort of happiness, which honestly is something diabolical. You know, he's locked up. He doesn't want Bond to get a happy ending, so he ruins that for him, and that's pretty evil for Blofeld to do. And I've kind of liked it. I saw that coming a mile away, but you know, I didn't mind it, and it really fits well with this Blofeld, as I would buy him wanting to do that with this incarnation at least. Anyway, this causes Bond to eventually lose it, and he ends up touching Blofeld. He's then, you know, called off Blofeld. Now, Blofeld getting under his skin, I thought they could have written it a little bit better, but I didn't mind it. We then turn around and find out that because Bond was infected with the nanobots, Blofeld's dead. For the first time ever in the series, Blofeld has been properly confirmed to be dead. Something that was never really quite done, or never said out loud in the original series. As the closest we ever got to that was For Your Eyes Only, in that opening teaser where a person who was Blofeld in everything but name, you know, was killed off. So they actually killed him off. And this really, for me, emphasizes we're wrapping up the Craig incarnation of Bond. You know, we're approaching the end of this particular incarnation of the character. And, you know, and really understanding this really is Craig's final film. They're wrapping up all the stories from the past characters. Eventually, Bond ends up heading over to Norway, which is where Madeleine is, and it's the same house that was in the opening of the film, though it's not in snow, it's more forest-like. Bond ends up making his way there, and, you know, essentially, he comes there to apologize, you know, realizing that she, you know, never betrayed him type of, you know, scene. And for me, it's a romantic scene, and I think powerful, these two to get reunited. People might say it's overdramatic and I'm not goofy, but wouldn't work for them. But I felt like it worked for me because these two are getting reunited. And just when that happens, I get the biggest shock in a Bond film to date. And that is, you hear a noise where this, I know those old sling toys, I guess from the 80s, goes down the stairs. They look up and see this little girl who was revealed to be Madeleine's daughter. And I'm like, holy crap, pardon my language, that is, if that's Madeleine's daughter, who's the father? And I immediately clicked, that's Bond's daughter. And I'm shocked. For the first time ever in the film franchise, Bond has a kid. Something just, I never thought, like, that would ever happen. It's just, it took me back in the theater. Of course, Madeleine tries to play it off that, you know, it's not, like, she's not yours, but I don't buy it for 1 minute. It's Bond's daughter. And you're wondering who Bond's daughter is. In the, you know, when it's telling the cast, that little kid, that's Bond's daughter. I love that scene, and you get a bit of comedic moments. It's like, I've got something else to tell you, and he goes, what, not another one? I cracked at the theater when I heard that joke. And, yeah, we can all agree, that's clearly Bond's daughter. Even though she's saying it's not his, it's his daughter. Come on, Madeleine wasn't fooling anyone with that line, not even Bond. I like the following scene as they get up, like Bond cooking like breakfast for the little girl, like the little kid. It feels like almost like a family that Bond has temporarily formed. Like, he's a father, he has a wife, and now a daughter. It just feels like Bond's getting a family. And of course you question, well, when was this child conceived? My best bet was when they were in Italy, and there was clearly hints because she was trying to tell him something. So I like that little bit turning in. And I like how, like, it was hinting that, you know, Bond, with Blofeld, had another secret to tell to Bond. And not only did Blofeld separate Bond from Madeleine, he separated Bond from his daughter, which is even something more, I would say, cruel for Blofeld to do. We then get another scene with Naomi tracking down, you know, Logan, thanks to really more Bond than anyone else. And we get this scene as, you know, Naomi essentially calling into M. M is essentially like in this hallway. We get to see all these paintings. One is of Judi Dench's M, a nice callback, but a callback I didn't expect was Robert Brown's M. You know, from the only Timothy Dalton films and the last 2 Roger Moore films. I love that little Easter egg here, and I clearly get the impression that all these paintings are at least portraits of previous people who held the position of M. So I really like that little aspect. Anyway, Bond is then tipped off by essentially Naomi that Logan, the CIA guy that portrayed Felix, is in the vicinity of Bond, and Bond quickly gets him, Madeleine, and his daughter out of there, and they end up driving away in a very nice car chase, and eventually it ends with, you know, the car essentially crashing, and, you know, they end up on the run. Eventually, Madeleine and her daughter end up getting kidnapped by some of the staff and henchmen, and Bond ends up in a confrontation with Logan, and there's this scene that is a clear reference to For Your Eyes Only, you know, with the car scene, you know, how he kicked, you know, how that car's on the cliff and he kicks it down. I get that, like, a nice little reference there, as Logan is trapped under this, I guess, branch thing, but the branch is also holding up the car. He asks Bond for help, but he doesn't, and essentially causes the car to fall on him and essentially kill him, getting revenge on what he did to Felix. It's a brutal scene. It fits in with Craig's Bond, and I love the reference. And I like how the reference, again, doesn't, you know, fully distract me from the scene. It gets me invested in this scene, which is pretty great. Anyway, just as Bond's walking away, you know, enraged how, you know, like, they've taken, like, Madeleine's daughter, Naomi shows up and picks him up and takes him back to, essentially, MI6. I like the bit, but I'm saying in the back of my head, where were you when all this went down? Anyway, but over with that, anyway, moving on. Anyway, Naomi and Bond essentially end up on this plane with Q, and essentially are getting ready for essentially the climax of the film. And Naomi finally lets go of her childness, I guess, and gives Bond back his 007 number. It's childish, but I like that, you know, for this final moment of the film, Bond is back with his 007 number. For me, it filled me with joy to have that bit. Anyway, we find out Staffan's hideout is on an island in Japan, and he's preparing to essentially unleash the bioweapon, you know, upon the world. It's clear that the guy is completely off his rocker. He wiped out Spectre, no doubt, as a rival competition to get out of the way, and he's going to essentially unleash it and kill, you know, make the world better by getting rid of anyone he doesn't deem, you know, worth, I guess, living, the bad guys. I clearly tell the guy's off his rocker. People say it's out of nowhere, but hey, if you're a villain, that's clearly that's clearly creepy, and a guy can tell it's a little bit off his rocker. For me, a character like that, you don't need logic. And honestly, this interrogating scene, like how he's taking Madeleine and his daughter throughout the garden, and now we find Primo, who was once Spectre's top henchman, now working with Stafford, so he managed to switch allegiances. I don't know how he did that, but he did that. And, you know, the scene where I go through the garden and seeing him preparing the bioweapon, it's just, like, it feels like a classic Bond villain lair, something we haven't seen in the series for a long time. It's also revealed that Stafford has created a specific version of the bioweapon, like, that he has, that if Madeleine doesn't behave, it will be used to not only kill her, but her daughter, essentially leaving the two essentially to be compliant with whatever he has to do. It's just crazy. We also find a little bit more about, again, maybe scenes before this, but here we also find a bit about Staffan's backstory, where Spectre killed his family, and that's why he wanted revenge on the whole Spectre organization. But also, if we find out that the person that killed his family was Mr. White, that's why he went after Madeleine's family, you know, early in the film. And just as Bond, you know, and Naomi are approaching the vicinity, they, you know, in this awesome scene with this plane that goes underwater and close into the facility, and essentially start a classic, like, you know, like, making their way through. I love just how they're infiltrating the vicinity. It's a classic Bond with, you know, him going up against, like, all the thugs within the facility. And again, I get, like, a sort of you only live twice vibe, but it's more Bond on his own with another rival, with another 007 agent going through the vicinity. Eventually, as Bond's making his way through the vicinity, he ends up coming face to face with Stafford, who is holding his daughter. If you wonder where Madeleine is, he's locked up in a room with some other of Stafford's guard. We get this nice little scene that is, for me, a callback to, you know, when you had those scenes where Bond is, like, in a confrontation with the villain, but not in a fist fight, but more in words, like with, it's like in Dr. No, you get stuff like that. Or in, you know, on Her Majesty's, where he's come proper face-to-face with Blofeld. I like that. And when he throws out the line, how, you know, like, how crazy men always think themselves to be God, I can't help but get a little throwback to definitely Dr. No. In fact, a lot of people often thought, before the film came out, that Stafford was, in many ways, another, you know, a modern update of Dr. No. And I see that in many moments of the film. And just as Bond essentially is kind of, you almost get the feeling he's about to accept defeat, he then uses a sneaky trick to try and get his Madeleine's daughter away from Stafford, but Stafford manages to get away with his daughter, but Bond ends up killing the thug. Madeleine also manages to get out of the predicament she's in by killing the thugs, and she happens to come in the room just when this all went down. And now, essentially, the two are teaming up to get, you know, so Madeleine can get her daughter back. The scene that follows that is then when Stafford has the daughter hostage, the daughter ends up biting him, he then drops her, and then he then allows her to walk away. It's something, I just don't know why. Maybe he just can't bring himself to kill a kid. I don't know if that's really the case, but I like to think that is. Even he's not, you know, that cruel to kill a kid, maybe. I don't know. It's just out there. Eventually, you know, Bond, Madeleine end up getting the kid back, and then Bond and Naomi end up essentially in gun battles throughout the vicinity, trying to, you know, take down the villains in the bio before it even gets launched off. We get some ships coming in, and I just like how it's a callback to classic Bond, with him infiltrating the vicinity, taking out the bad guys. For me, it feels like old times, and like we haven't missed, that we've missed from the classic Bond series. And this is all leading up to the climax. Eventually, Naomi ends up, getting her hands on Upashov, and he ends up saying this line, how his virus will kill, the people they don't deem worthy, and implied a bit of a racial slur towards her. It kind of comes out of nowhere, but then this leads to one of my favorite moments, what she does, and that is when she kills him and says, there's no time to die, line, and essentially pushes him into this river of really toxic, what's clearly used with the virus. Bond is then making his way up the stairs as he gets into a gun battle with the henchman, and then ends up in a fist fight with Primo. I love the camera work here and the choreography. It feels fresh, but it also feels so Bond-like. Eventually, Bond does end up killing Primo by using his watch to overcharge his electric eye, essentially, killing his brain. And he says, his classic Bond quips. And eventually, Bond does the classic, quip, and ends up going further into the vicinity. Naomi manages to get Madeleine and her daughter onto a lifeboat to quickly get out. Bond then plans to open the shuttered doors so they could fire missiles into the vicinity, therefore destroying the entire factory. And just as he opens it, he then walks away and then finds Madeleine's daughter's stuffed toy. And even though it's a brief moment, I like he picks it up and almost has this childlike smirk. Just as he's on his way out, finds out the shutter doors are being closed, and then he ends up into a confrontation with Staffen. Now, it's a brutal fight, but what really gets, me caught off guard is finding out that he is now infected with the virus. And it's not just any virus, it's the one that would have been designed to kill Madeleine if he never went along with Staffen. Now he's infected, so if he ever reunites with her, the virus will be transferred to her and kill not only her, but her daughter. And it's a diabolical thing. He actually has Bond almost checkmated. Bond then picks up the gun and essentially shoots Staffen. I don't mind the fight, and even though Staffen goes out in an unbelievable way, I like that, that even though he's going out and getting killed, he, takes the price of knowing, that he's given Bond a worse fate than death. And that is brutal. Just as he's making his way to reopen the shutter doors, knowing he's not going to outrun the blast even if he tried, he then contacts Anne and essentially asks, can the virus be killed? He says no. And essentially, Q then realizes he's infected and the virus is specific to target Madeleine. He then asks Q to have a one-way talk with Madeleine, essentially one last kind of goodbye. It's brutal. And as the rockets are approaching, Bond is looking like he's accepting death. Craig is pulling this off. You can tell he's in pain, both physically because of the fight, but emotionally knowing that, he can't be with Madeleine. Be with Madeleine's daughter, and of course they reveal that Madeleine's daughter is really Bond's daughter. It's still an emotional scene. And Bond saying how she has all the time in the world. The rockets are approaching the vicinity, which is now open to be destroyed courtesy of the shutter doors being open, and then the rockets just blast down on the vicinity, wiping Bond out. It is brutal. Brutal. And for the first time ever in the series, Bond is dead. And I mean dead. For the first time ever, Bond was known to survive whatever came his way. So Staffen is the first villain in the series to really kill Bond, if you think about it. He knew Bond can... With him infected with the virus, he can't be reunited with Madeleine, so he decides to accept death. And it was a brutal way for him to go out, and Craig pulls off the emotional aspect of it so well. And it's just one hell of a way to take him out. This is then, and we hear it on the radio, where everyone from M, Tanner, Moneypenny, Q, Madeleine, and even Naomi hearing that Bond is dead. We then cut to back at M's office, where M, Tanner, Moneypenny, Q, Naomi are essentially a toast, and essentially almost like a mini wake with them acknowledging Bond's death and almost like paying some respect. M reads this beautiful poem which is honestly a bit of a callback to really an Easter egg to Ian Fleming, but it's just like them mourning his like death, and really just shows us how much of an impact Bond has really had on all of them, and they just, you know, just accept his death and essentially, M does say essentially go back to his job, but you just know that just the scene with Bond gone, like proper dead, it's just heartbreaking. We then end the film with Madeleine driving the, you know, living daylights Aston Martin with her daughter in the car, and basically with the "We Have All the Time in the World" music in the background, and basically saying to her, you know, you're going to hear a story of Bond, James Bond. Essentially, she's about to tell him her father, you know, about her father. And it's just so beautiful. The scene is clearly an homage to what it was in the opening of the film, but also the drive-off moments of, you know, on Her Majesty's, just, you know, how they were driving off almost kind of after the wedding. And it's just a beautiful, "We Have All the Time in the World" soundtrack really lifts it up for me, and then we end with the car driving into the tunnel and going black. It is just, for me, a beautiful way to end this film and ultimately draw a final chapter to the Craig incarnation of Bond films. This is where No Time to Die ends. No Time to Die. I don't even know how to describe this film, but if I could try, I want to say it did one thing. It was definitely different. For me, this film did something that honestly had never been done in the series before. Spectre is wiped out. Felix Slider is killed. Bond has a daughter, but ultimately this film will be remembered for the first time ever in the series, Bond getting killed. The first time ever done in a Bond film for me. They did it. Bond's killed off. Now, but with that, how do I feel about the film? Well, I definitely know this. Was definitely a journey to watching the end of the Craig era. My introduction to Bond was Craig's first film. And even though I didn't get to see Quantum in the theater, I was there to see Skyfall in the theater, and I made it my mission to, at least when the new Bond film comes out, my goal is to watch it in theaters and have that ultimate experience. So I was definitely needed to see this film to see the Craig films come to an end. The Craig films are definitely the most unique films in the series, as it's really its own thing. It's a complete reboot, and sometimes the Craig films can be a little bit different because of new creative ideas or new people on them, but I felt that for the most part, the films work. But how do I personally feel about No Time to Die? Do I think it's one of the great films? Do I think it's average? Or do I think it is one of the worst? Well, obviously, when it comes to Daniel Craig's top 3 Bond films, this is definitely up there in the top 3. And it definitely, for me, takes the 3rd spot, personally, for top 3 Craig films. But honestly, I really like this film. It feels different. It feels different, but it also feels like it's going back to classic Bond. And there is a little bit of, I'd say, the Mission Impossible vibe to this film, but also at the same time a bit of influence a little bit by, you know, the MCU with the huge major movie franchises are now getting off the ground. This film, for me, definitely, you know, for me, launched Bond really well back into the public eye. Now, I really love this film. Craig, for me, I think is one of his best performances as Bond, and I felt he was consistently good. Even in his final film, he still delivered a fantastic Bond performance. And I think because, like, he was given the ability to explore whatever emotional range with the character, like, it wasn't always one-dimensional every time, you know, he came back for a film. They were always exploring new assets of the film. Madeleine was given a chance to really, you know, express more, you know, range now. And honestly, I really believe that Bond really genuinely fell in love with her, and back. So making Madeleine now the 3rd woman in Bond's life for him to really fall in love with, especially since he now has a daughter with her. The film also, like, it killed off Spectre, it killed off Felix Slider, it killed off Blofeld. Like, some people, like, the things that, like, people in Bond films we've seen before, especially during the classic era. And it was done really by Staffen, the first villain to do so. He succeeded in doing some of this diabolical stuff. He killed off Spectre and really killed off Blofeld. Bond couldn't do that in the original series. Staffen did. How do I feel about Staffen, though, as a villain? Well, he's a great villain. He's not top 10. I think he might become maybe a honorable mention. Not replacing Le Chiffre, but I say on the same level of Le Chiffre for me personally. He's definitely the most creepy, intimidating. Malik gives a such creepy performance here and owns the role and makes it work. And also the way he dresses and looks, just look, you know, I feel he's more like a comic book villain. But he also has that, you know, creepiness and almost deranged that I don't think anyone could pull off. Now, things I don't like about the film. The fact that, again, I didn't like they recycled the whole, you know, the world is changing and the spy game is changing and they need to get up to date with that. I didn't like that bit. But I did love the constant references to On Her Majesty's. Again, my go-to Bond film, my favorite one of all time. I also love how, yeah, no, they did, like how M was really responsible for the plot of the film, which is very interesting that they would have that be done with the M character. A lot of references, but not ones that feel so jarring. Some of the action scenes were done in this film were just great. They felt new, they felt fresh, and some of them were even callbacks to previous Bond adventures. Again, hardcore fans could pick up on that. This film would definitely end. Now, Naomi. I don't really like her character that well. I felt that she honestly didn't become something into her own until at the end of the film. As for the most part, I found her just this, really just like this 007 rival. Which I didn't mind the aspect of, but I found it a little bit annoying at times. And it wasn't until the end of the film, like in that gun battle moment where, you know, she came into really her own. I really found her really enjoyable. And okay, now this film is definitely going to be divided by amongst fans. Personally, I loved it. I had an absolute blast watching it. And if I could redo it, I think this might take either the 13th spot or maybe the 12th spot on my Bond film list. Because I just really liked it. Not enough to crack into the top 10, as those films are very personal and precious to me. But for me, this film was definitely around there somewhere. And it also definitely, for me, broke the curse of a final Bond film being good. Because for most of the series run, the final Bond films for an actor's tenure weren't good. View to a Kill, Die Another Day, and Diamonds Are Forever not being really good. License to Kill and maybe On Her Majesty's Secret Service are maybe the only exception, but that's because the 10 years were over before they really ever began. But this is the first time where I'd say that when a person began their 10-year on a really strong note and ended on a really strong note. And I don't think it will be a while before we finally get that, in a Bond film. But now with the Craig era over, I'm just wondering what's next for the series and the franchise as a whole. Who knows? I can't wait for the next announcements of the Bond film. It's probably not going to come out until maybe until next year or even the year before that. I just hope it's not going to be a long wait until we get a new Bond film. And there we have it. That was No Time to Die. The final Daniel Craig film and the end of the Craig Bond films as a general. The end of an era. You heard my thoughts on the film. I personally enjoyed it. And if you haven't seen it and you've clearly watched this video because, I don't know, you've already seen it and you wanted to get my personal thoughts. If you haven't, and you've watched it all the way to this point, I say give it a watch. You will be enjoyed with the film. I certainly did. And I can't wait to see where we go next in the Bond series. But until then, this has been the Steven Hour. And ladies and gentlemen, so long for now. And don't worry, there will be another Bond film. Well, we just have to wait. Hopefully not that long. I'll see you then.